Hello, everybody. Welcome to Northside. We're so glad you could join us for this Wednesday evening service. We're going to continue in the series we started on Revelation. This is the 8th part. And from here on out, we're going to change things up a little bit. We're going to be talking about different people, events, things, and we're going to separate them and talk through those things. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Antichrist and the false prophet. So the Antichrist, you may have heard his name. He's called the Beast, the Lawless One, the Antichrist, the Merciless Ruler, the Little Horn. He's named many different things, but it's all talking about the Antichrist. The false prophet is called the whore, the prostitute, the second beast, the little beast. So just those imagery sometimes just loses people, but we'll explain through those things as we go along. In John's epistles, not his gospel, but his epistles, he begins to bring out the term Antichrist. It's used right here. This is where we get the term Antichrist. 1 John 2:18, it says this, "Dear children, this is the last hour, and as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come. This is how we know it is the last hour." Now, so many times people have dubbed people in history the Antichrist, or they said every president in the United States that comes into power, they call him the Antichrist. But in fact, people like Mussolini and Hitler and Nero, all these different rulers throughout times, they've been called the Antichrist, and they are a type of the Antichrist. Hitler was a great type of the Antichrist. He came in, he persecuted the Jews, he began to align people under powers, he was the cause of a major world war. A lot of things looked like it was shaping up, except he didn't fit into the end time narrative. In 1 John 4:3, it goes on, it says this, "But every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard is coming and even now is already in the world." There's a spirit that's out there, and the atheist spirit, the other false religions that are out there, they are the Antichrist spirit. They began to deny Jesus as the chosen one, as the Holy One. And so therefore they are a part of that Antichrist spirit. Last week, we told you that the tribulation begins with Revelation chapter number 6. But Revelation chapter number 6 is a picture of what happens when the Antichrist comes into power. Revelation 6:2, it tells us this, "I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror, bent on conquest." So what we're going to begin to discuss today is who the Antichrist is, what he's doing, when is he going to do it, where is he going to do it, and how he's going to be able to show his power and do the things that he does. We're also going to do this with a false prophet. We're going to say who it is, what, when, where, and how. Now the who is going to be speculation. We don't know who either one of them is going to be. We have an idea of who we think they may be. All right? Not by name, but by maybe associations. So the early fathers begin to think that the Antichrist was from the tribe of Dan. The reason why they did that, Jacob had 12 sons. The tribe of Dan was the first one to be led out into idol worship. And so when Jacob is on his deathbed, he begins to lay hands and blessings and cursings on his children. He says over Dan, "You are going to be like a serpent, an adder. You're going to be biting at the heels of the horsemen, and cause them to fall over." It is a scripture that's given about this. And so from this very vague scripture, they said, see, he is a serpent. In the book of Revelation, Satan is called the serpent. He actually takes over the Antichrist in his spirit. And so they say this is that, that Dan is the one, the lost tribe of Dan. Somebody's going to rise up out of that. And also in the book of Revelation, when it names the 12 tribes, it names them in heaven. It doesn't name the tribe of Dan. It leaves them out. And so this is This is the reason why the early church fathers, and even all the way up to the 1980s, they were really pushing that the Antichrist was from the tribe of Dan. But they didn't have much biblical references to say, hey, this is where he came from. We do know this about the Antichrist. He's going to lead the Gentiles. No Muslim nation is going to be led by somebody who's Jewish. They're not. They're not going to let a Jewish person lead them. They're not going to follow a Jew. I believe he may have some Jewish blood in him, maybe from the tribe of Dan. It may be a mix of both, but I don't believe so. I believe that his mother may be Jewish and his father is Arab and probably Muslim. But he's not going to be a devout Muslim and not an extremist. No extremist is ever going to go with somebody who's even got any type of Jewish blood in them at all. He's going to rise by political power and by just having a knowledge on how to manipulate people and manipulate markets. And he's going to rise up by his political powers. He's going to begin to use his deception, his manipulation, and his ingenuity to begin to shape world markets and shape things for his benefit. So go with me in Revelation chapter number 13, verses 1 through 18. And as we go along, I'll discuss what we're talking about, but we'll see more of who the Antichrist and the false prophet are. In Revelation 13, verse number 1, it says this, "And the dragon, Satan, stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast, the Antichrist, coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns, or 10 kingdoms, and 7 heads, 7 continents, with 10 crowns on his horns. And each one had a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard," which means his kingdom is going to move quickly like that of Alexander the Great. And he had feet like those of a bear and mouth like that of a lion. He was going to be moving quickly and powerfully in a powerful military like Artaxerxes and the Persian Empire. And then he would be able to speak and have that great political power like Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. Verse 3 says this, "One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound," as in it looks like he's shot in the head or is killed, but the fatal wound had been healed. Some people believe this is where artificial intelligence comes in. It's not really him. "The whole world has been astonished in following the beast. Men worshiped the dragon because he was given authority to the beast, and he also worshiped the beast and asked, 'Who is like the beast? Who can make war against him?'" In verse 5 it says this, "The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise his authority for 42 months. This is when he comes in extreme power, he takes over at that great tribulation. And verse 6 says, "He opened his mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and all those who live under heaven." This happens at the abomination of desolation at the 3.5-year mark. He's given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. He's given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. He who has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to go into captivity he will go. If anyone is to be killed with a sword he will be killed. This calls for patience, endurance, and faithfulness on the part of the saints. Then I saw another beast coming out of the earth. This is the false prophet. He had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke like the dragon. So he would say Christian things, but he's actually speaking like the devil. He begins to say something. He's double-minded. He begins to say things that sound Christian, but at the same time, he's saying and doing evil things. He exercised with all authority of the first beast on his behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, the Antichrist, whose fatal wound had been healed. And he performed great and miraculous signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of men. Because of the signs he was given, satanic powers, right? Given the powers to do on behalf of the first beast, He deceived all the inhabitants of the earth. He ordered them to set up an image in honor of the first beast, the Antichrist, who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And in verse 15 it says this, he was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast so that it could speak and cause all who refuse to worship the image to be killed. I have no idea what this is. In verse 16 it says this, he also forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free or slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead. This is the mark of the beast. So that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark. You can't go to Walmart, you can't get things from Amazon, you can't trade. None of that stuff can happen unless you have this mark, this barcode, this chip, whatever it is. I have no idea. Which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. And verse 18 says, this calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is the man's number, which is the number 666. 2 Thessalonians verse number 2 through verse number 4, it says this, concerning the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ and being gathered to him, we ask you, brothers, not to become easily unsettled or alarmed by some prophecies. All right, we're talking about those prophecies right now. These prophecies, reports, or letters supposed to have come from us saying that the day of the Lord has already come. It hasn't. Okay, this was written after 70 AD. This does away with the fact that people think that this is the Roman Empire, that all that Revelation is a story about Rome. That's already passed. This is not true. This day has not come yet. But in verse 3 it says, don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs. That's this last 3.5 years. And the man of lawlessness is revealed. That's the Antichrist. The man doomed to destruction. He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. So I know in chapter 13 it's a lot of imagery, but it does tell us the next thing is when. We told you who we think the Antichrist is, but it just tells us when. Also, Daniel 8:19 and 23 tells us that his power will be in the last days. Daniel 9:27 tells us that. Also, Jeremiah and Isaiah, they all tell us those things. But what is he going to do? Well, one major thing he's going to do is he's going to make a treaty with many. Again, Daniel 9:27, as you see it on the screen, says, he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7, and in the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offerings. So he's talking about the 7-year tribulation. And on the wing of the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end time is decreed and is poured out on him. But it says he will confirm a covenant with many. What does this covenant look like? Well, he makes a peace covenant, a peace treaty between the Jews and the Muslims and the rest of the world. Where's all the conflict at? It's in the Middle East. That's where your conflict is. That's who the wars are against. He's going to set up a peace treaty. It tells us in Scripture that Israel will be at peace, not worried about its borders. When has Israel ever not been worried about its borders? You know, in the Old Testament, there's always walls. Right now, they're always worried about this Palestinian conflict and what's going on there and about who's coming in. So when's that going to be? All right, it's going to be at this time when the Antichrist rises up. He makes this treaty. And so we know there's a treaty because he opens back up the temple to the Jews. Now, something has happened here. There's been some type of land deal that's gone on between the Muslims and the Jews. Because what's happened is he's allowed the Dome of the Rock to stay, all right, per se. But yet, being built beside it is the temple. And so something is happening. Right now, if you go to Israel, you'll see where the Temple Mount used to be is where the Dome of the Rock is now. It's one of the holy sites of Islam. Well, it's right there on top of the Temple Mount, where the Jews used to do all the temple worship. So there has to be something. If the temple is being rebuilt, and by the way, in a bunker or a warehouse, whatever, right now in Israel, they've begun to gather all the pieces to rebuild the temple. They've been taking up money now for decades, and they're rebuilding the menorah and the table of shewbread and the altar of incense and the laver and the brazen altar and the Ark of the Covenant. All these things have been reset and remade by craftsmen, just like it was in the Old Testament. And the parts and the pieces to the stone and everything that goes into the temple, the curtain for the Holy of Holies, all those things are being rebuilt, made right now, and are being stored in Israel for when this time comes, they're ready to build. And that building won't take long. They don't have much time. They have 7 years. So these things have already taken place, which kind of gives me a little bit of notice that it could be at any moment if they're finished rebuilding all those things. But it also tells me that this treaty has happened, and they're not going to build the temple somewhere else. They're going to build it where it's supposed to go, and it's right there next to the Dome of the Rock. So my thought is, where the Palestinians won't land in Gaza and some of the Golan Heights and those places in Syria, they make a deal. Listen, you can have some of these areas back. We're still going to call it Israel, but we're going to let you move back in. But you're going to give us this holy site. And the Antichrist is going to broker this deal. And when it happens, Israel's going to feel at peace. They're going to let down their guard. They're going to begin temple worship again, and they're going to be just amazing. They're going to become wealthy, as we talked about last week and the week before. They're going to become a place that they're going to have food when everybody else doesn't have food, and they're going to have industry when other places don't have industry. And these first 3.5 years, when these judgments are poured out, Israel is safe from these things. So this is happening right now. Matthew 24:15 tells us that the temple will be rebuilt, and so this is a big deal because there's extremists out there right now that are not going to stand for this, and so they're going to go to battle. So when we're talking about Muslims, we're not talking about extreme Muslims. We're not talking about extremists. They're not going to let anybody, they're not going to let the Zionists or Jerusalem have anything. So what they're going to do is they're going to rise up against this power. They're going to rise up against the Antichrist. And there's going to be a battle. And it says out of Egypt and Libya, Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, Algeria, these areas, there's going to be a battle that's going to come forward. And there's going to be some Islamic nations that are going to rise up against the Antichrist, and he's going to beat them. Even tells us possibly Syria and Iran. And there's going to be a battle, and he's going to beat them. It says in Isaiah chapter number 19, verses 4-8, that he is going to decimate them, that the farmers won't be able to farm, the fishermen won't even be able to fish, you won't be able to grow anything or even live in that land, which makes me think that there's going to be a nuclear attack. Daniel chapter number 11, verse 40-45 tells us about this battle, and that they came up against them and the Antichrist destroys them. And the only reason he doesn't kill them is, it says, because those in the east, China and Russia from the north, and Britain or America from the west, tells them to stand down. Now, listen, we're going to follow you, but you've already destroyed them. You've already broken their back. Don't wipe them off the face of the earth. So now we know what he does. So where does he do this? Well, those Egyptian countries and those places he just defeated, he takes over. Those African countries begin to follow him. The other Islamic nations begin to follow him. And so he makes a deal with them also. He also makes a deal with what used to be the Roman Empire. He brings them into the prosperity that's going on right here in these countries. He begins to share with them. He begins to allow Jews from all over the world to come in and have their temple worship. In Revelation 13:7, it tells us that he rules the whole world from Rome. Now, I don't believe it is Rome as in Italy. If you do remember that the Roman Empire did split, where Constantinople is a city that Constantine moved over to the Byzantine Empire, and he began to rule. And it's also a Muslim nation now. It used to be Constantinople. Now it's Istanbul, Turkey. So this all kind of shapes up in the end. And if you look on your screen right now, you see outlined the old Roman Empire. And in that Roman Empire, you see these African nations. You see Libya and Egypt. And just below that, Egypt is Sudan and Ethiopia and Somalia and all those places, Algeria. They're all here on this map. And so what you what you see is the old map of the Roman Empire, and you see Turkey right there in the middle of that. So Turkey is going to be what I believe is a big player in all this. Syria right now has been split up. Syria has been taken over by many nations. And so I believe Syria is the gateway where battles can happen and people can come into Israel in a later time. But it is the old Roman Empire. Now, something interesting. You see to the east of this, the other countries he's made deals with. You see Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Iran. There's Tajikistan. You see Turkmenistan. You see Uzbekistan. You see Kyrgyzstan. You see Afghanistan. You see Pakistan. You see all these places. They're all a part of this end time deal. Now, you say, well, the old Roman Empire, it looks to me as if it's a lot of European countries. How is this going to work? How is this going to be set up? How is he going to use the European Union in all this? A lot of people think the 10 Kingdoms is a part of the European Union. I believe so as well. But if you look at the current EU, if you look at the map on your screen, you see the United Kingdom has stepped out of it. The reason why the United Kingdom has stepped out of it, why Great Britain has taken themselves out, is they don't want the European Union telling them who and who cannot come across their borders. So, similar to the way that Donald Trump's doing with our borders, Europe's doing that. Because, not Europe, but the Great Britain is doing that. Because Great Britain was told by the EU, you can't tell who comes in and you can't stop who comes in and who goes out. Because we tell you who can come in and who comes out. The EU is actually over your government. Well, Britain said that's not going to take place. We're not going to be a part of this. And so they didn't like the fact that in some of these countries that once you come into the EU, you have a passport for all the EU countries. That means you can travel between each one. You can live in each one, and it doesn't matter. So then you come along and you see down in the corner here, you see Turkey. Well, Turkey's been trying to get into the European Union for decades. Turkey's really making headway now to come in. The only reason that they haven't been given the right to do it is because they're primarily a Muslim country. And once you give them a passport, anybody that comes into Turkey that they can give a passport to come into, they now have access to the rest of Europe, and they can come in and nobody can stop it. This is very interesting because Turkey is the hub. All right, it is the point. It was the old Roman Empire. Istanbul is right there. It's that little piece of land that connects them and the rest of Europe. I believe that Turkey is going to be allowed into the European Union, and I believe that you're going to begin to see countries like Spain and France and all them leave unless they're overrun with a Muslim influence. Then they have no choice. And they're going to be given a passport and they can go anywhere they want to. So you see how this thing can shape out. So here's what we know about the Antichrist. He's going to be an intellectual genius. All right, he's going to be super smart. He's going to be a political savvy person, a political genius. He's going to begin to bring people to the table and say things that no one else has been able to do for all eternity. I mean, he's going to be an oratorical genius, where he's going to be able to speak and draw people in. He's going to be a commercial genius. He's going to be a real estate tycoon. He's going to be a military genius. This is told to us in Daniel 7, 11, 8. Revelation chapter number 13 says he's going to be an administrative genius. And then the one thing that we got to understand in 2 Thessalonians 2:4, it tells us he's going to be a religious genius. He's going to begin to say, hey, you know what? Let's bring everybody together. How is he going to do this? He's going to do this in part with help from the false prophet. So he can only arise because the church has been moved out of the way, because people would say this is false, this is wrong, what you're saying is not right. There is going to be a remnant that's going to be left over through that time. Israel's going to be saved, and there's going to be a part of them that are there. They're going to be there to call out what's false, but they're going to be under great persecution. But when the false prophet is there, this is going to make some people mad right here, but I believe that the false prophet is going to be Catholic. Now, Does that mean that there's going to be no Catholics that are going the rapture? I'm not saying that. I believe there's some devout people that are there that are going to be called up. But I'm going to tell you what, I've been many places in the world, and some of the creepiest places I've been to are Catholic cathedrals in which I went into, and basically idol worship's going on. In fact, I stood in front of one time where Mary was sitting on the throne and Jesus was kneeling in front of her, and people were worshiping these idols. There was a glass box that had Jesus with a crown of thorns in it, and people crawled in on their knees, paying penance, and they would kiss the box. Everybody's kissing the box. It's just so much demonic activity. They were bowing to gargoyle statues, and there was so you could see how somebody could come in and influence people who have a weak mind in this area. And I believe it's going to be someone particularly like a pope that is going to come and rise to power after the people have been raptured. Somebody's going to step into that place. So if you're Catholic and you're mad at me right now, I'm sorry, but it's set up to be an amazing role, because worldwide, the Catholic means the universal church. That's what the word Catholic means. And I believe it takes that role in the end times. So all those that are left behind all over the world, they're going to be joined together with this false prophet. This is how he ties them all together. He begins to say, you know what? Jesus actually was a type of the Messiah, but the Messiah has not yet come. This is the Messiah. I'm telling you, this is. Look, he was wounded. He's been raised again on the third day. He's going to be speaking a great lie. And then he's going to turn to those that are Islamic. And the Antichrist is going to begin to speak to them and say, don't you understand who I am? I'm the Mahdi. And in the Islamic world, there is an end-time prophecy about the Mahdi coming to power in a time of great tribulation for 7 years. In fact, it tells them that they will probably have to go through hell for 7 years. They were going to lose battles, but the Mahdi would rise to power. They're going to say, the false prophet and the Antichrist and those imams that follow in behind this, they're going to say the Antichrist is the Mahdi. This is the Messiah, the Islamic version of the Messiah. Well, Jews are going to believe that he is the Messiah also, because they're going to see things in Isaiah chapter 53, and they're going to look at these things and they're going to apply them to the Antichrist. It's going to be non-devout Catholics. It's going to be false Christians. It's going to be not Orthodox Jews. It's going to be non-extremist Muslims. But they're all going to come together under this influence of the false prophet and the Antichrist. And so how he ties them together is going to be amazing. After the nuking of Egypt, he's going to bring all those countries together. He's going to bring the EU together with the world economy and their markets under one universal government system. And he's going to bring one market to the world. So the Antichrist is going to control how we buy and sell things. This is a very big deal. You just can't go to the supermarket in this day. There's going to have to be, you're either going to have a garden or something hidden away. You're not going to be able to buy and sell. You're not going to be able to go to the grocery store and just buy things anymore. You're going to only be able to do this through this one world market. And by that, you have to have given alliance to the Antichrist. And there's a visible mark that's going to be on the forehead or in the wrist. It could be in a form of a barcode, like we said before, a chip. I have no idea, a symbol. But most likely it's going to be some kind of digital device because of the day and age we live in. But these are just speculations. All right, the mark of the beast, the 666. I don't know how that's going to be brought to pass. I just know that it is because the Word of God tells us so. And it's so right on, and everything else is set. We know this, that at this moment, things start going awry. Israel begins to pay attention. I mean, the peace is being messed with. In fact, it says the Antichrist, he was going to bring peace, and he was going to destroy them by peace. He was going to bring destruction by peace. And this was how he deceives people. He brings this deception. He is deception at its best or at its worst, whatever you want to say. Around this time, though, when Israel begins to pay attention and they start to get the feeling, All right, and there's other people around the world that are paying attention and reading the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel. They're getting the uh-oh feeling going on. They're beginning to see that this Antichrist is not who he says he is. And everything's going to begin to fall in line. And then there's going to be something called the abomination of desolation. This happens in the Jewish temple. This is where the 3.5-year mark hits. All right, obviously it's at the 3.5 years. The Antichrist comes into the temple. It says that Satan has been cast out of heaven, and he has taken over the Antichrist, and he places himself in the temple in an unholy way. He begins to be worshipped in an unlawful way to the Jewish people. He probably takes the seat on the mercy seat in the temple that's there. He probably sits down where the sacrifice is made and where the presence of God is, and he sits there and he says, "This is now my throne. This is where I rule. I am God, and you must worship me." And he begins to do this because he begins to take out the Jewish people. They're not going to stand for it. They're going to go at war with him. Well, all the world's powers are going to come down on them. We'll explain a little bit more of that in a second. The 144,000 people that have been preaching and teaching that are Jews that have been set up that we're going to talk about in another session, and the martyrs that we're going to talk about in another session, and the 2 witnesses that we're going to go into more detail in another session, they are killed. And the reason why they're killed is because they're bringing all kind of plagues onto the earth. And the Antichrist comes in, he declares himself as God. He takes out those... He takes out the 2 witnesses. He begins to persecute the Jews. There's actually something that's done where this is called Gog of Magog begins to happen. There's a battle. And basically, the Gog is a person. Some people try to put this in Upper Russia. That's fine. I believe Gog means extreme leader, extreme superior chancellor, which is going to be what the Antichrist is. Magog is the war of the north, people coming down and going to war with Jerusalem. I'm going to show you an actual map of Magog there. You see there, Turkey is a major player. All those African nations I talk about, they're a major player. Iran is a major player. You see Ethiopia and all those other countries, Somalia and Ethiopia, they're major players. But then you see the army of the north. Russia has made an alliance, and it may be Russia or it may be these southern Russian states. People say you get the word Moscow from Magog, and it may be. You see Russia has ties to a lot of places like Iran and different places in there. They're in there right now fighting in Syria with the Iranian people. You can see how they could be major players in the end time. But it could be all the stands, the Tajikistan's and all those places that are along there. This coalition comes in and they attack Israel. So you see that map, they all converge on Israel. And this is the battle of of Magog. Some people say Gog and Magog. It's actually in the scriptures, Gog of Magog. And so all these coalitions, the EU, everybody goes to war right here in Jerusalem, and those powers are removed. Israel has to flee in the Jordan. We'll talk more about that later. But there's an all-out assault on Israel, a worldwide assault, as you can see on the map. The 2 witnesses that have brought these plagues, they have been killed. They're raised again. They're removed. There's a war in heaven. Again, as Satan is cast down, he enters the Antichrist. And this is probably when he takes his place in that temple. And literally all hell breaks loose on the earth. Revelation chapter 9. So many things that happen there. This is the start of the Great Tribulation. There is an earthquake. There is a rapture that takes place. And that rapture consists of the 144,000, any of those martyrs, other saints. These people are removed from the earth. And then there's the rise of Babylon. Now you can see on your screen, this is the area of Babylon. And if you look closely, some of those old places are mentioned there, but just below Baghdad is where Babylon was, and it's in present-day Iraq. That's where Mesopotamia is. That is where the Fertile Crescent was. All these things are where Babylon is to rise again. And this begins to happen with the authority and the wealth and the power of the Antichrist, and he sets up a kingdom right here. Also, in this time, all these plagues are poured out even worse than before. There are trumpet judgment, there are bowl judgments, all those things we're going to talk about at a later time. Armageddon is starting. All these nations are gathered together with the Antichrist. Again, something we're going to go into later. And then there's the return of Jesus. And then the Antichrist goes up to and attacks Jesus along with the false prophet. And the Antichrist is cut down quickly along with the false prophet. If you will go with me to Revelations 19, verse 20, it says, "But the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet, who had performed the miraculous signs on his behalf. With these signs he had deluded those who had received the mark of the beast and had worshipped his image. The two of them are thrown down alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. The rest of them were killed with a sword that came out of the mouth of the rider on the horse. All the birds gorged themselves on their flesh." So there is a ramrod. As much as I can pour into this 30 to 40 minutes, as hard as I could go, this is a picture of the Antichrist and the false prophet in the end. You and I, we don't want to be here at that time. We want to be ready. We want to go in the rapture. And we can know these things. And the Bible says by studying these things, we are blessed. Be blessed.